I remember sitting in a quiet classroom, a projector buzzing softly, and a short video flickering to life on the screen. At the time, I had no idea that this moment, seemingly simple and part of a routine lesson, would etch itself into my memory. We all have those unexpected turning points, don't we? You're not looking for inspiration, but something strikes you in such a way that your perception changes forever. That's what happened to me. It wasn't flashy. No special effects, no booming music. Just a calm, grounded man sharing his thoughts on life, struggle, and discipline. At first, I barely paid attention, but something about the way the message unfolded kept me rooted. And before I knew it, I wasn't just watching, I was listening. He spoke about life as a series of steps, a journey of self-mastery. He talked about how most of us are constantly searching outside ourselves for meaning, when in truth everything we seek, peace, clarity, strength, is already within us. It just has to be uncovered. He spoke of pain, but not as a punishment, rather as a teacher. He challenged the idea that life should be easy, that maybe it's the very struggles we try to avoid that hold the key to our growth. That every time we run from discomfort, we also run from transformation. In school, we're taught math, science, literature. We learn dates, formulas, and facts. But this video, it taught me something different. Something I hadn't found in any textbook. It taught me how to observe my mind. It gave me permission to slow down, to breathe, and to be present, not just with the world, but with myself. And as I reflect now, I realize I didn't just watch a video. I encountered a mirror. It showed me my excuses. It showed me my fears, but more importantly, it showed me that I had the power to confront them. It didn't promise ease. It promised understanding, and that was enough. What I watched in school wasn't part of the official curriculum, but it should have been, because it planted seeds. Seeds that would grow into a mindset I carry with me to this day. A mindset that says, clarity begins when chaos ends within. That discipline isn't punishment, it's freedom. That peace isn't found, it's created. So if you ask me what I remember most from school, it's not a lesson from a book. It's that video, that moment, that inner spark. And now I want to share the core of what I learned from it, distilled into 6 powerful lessons that can change the way you live, think, and grow. One of the first and most powerful realizations I took away from that experience was this: the greatest obstacle is not outside of us, it's within. We spend so much of our lives trying to conquer the world around us. We chase achievements, control our surroundings, and try to shape people and situations to fit our desires. But what we often fail to realize is that our external world is only a reflection of our internal one. The moment I heard those words, it was like a quiet bell ringing somewhere deep in my soul. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. I realized I had been fighting battles in all the wrong places. The real battlefield wasn't school. It wasn't my relationships. It wasn't society. It was my own mind. This idea that the mind can be both a prison and a key struck me with unexpected force. I thought about all the times I had blamed the outside world for my stress, my frustration, my lack of motivation. I blamed school for being overwhelming. I blamed friends for being distant. I blamed time for being too short. But I never questioned the root of that frustration. How my thoughts, my assumptions, and my inner dialogue shaped the way I experienced everything. That's when it dawned on me, my perspective wasn't just coloring my world, it was creating it. From that point forward, I started to observe myself more closely, not in a judgmental way, but with curiosity. I noticed how quickly my thoughts would spiral the moment something didn't go according to plan. I noticed how often fear disguised itself as logic, how I would avoid opportunities, not because they weren't good, but because a quiet voice in the back of my head whispered, "What if you fail?" That voice was always there. I just hadn't seen it clearly until then. But now I could name it. I could face it. And that changed everything. It's uncomfortable at first, confronting your own patterns. You begin to see how often you sabotage your own peace, how often you cling to your pain because it's familiar. You realize that discipline doesn't come from brute force. It comes from clarity. It comes from knowing who you are, what you value, and what kind of life you want to live. Without that inner clarity, We end up living by reaction instead of intention. We bounce from one distraction to another, hoping something will finally make us feel whole. But wholeness doesn't come from adding more. It comes from letting go. Letting go of fear, letting go of comparison, letting go of the need for approval, and that's not easy. We've been conditioned from a young age to seek validation, to chase certainty, to avoid discomfort. But the truth is, everything we're looking for begins where comfort ends. Growth lives on the edge of difficulty, and the more we resist facing ourselves, the more we stay stuck in cycles of dissatisfaction. There was a moment, I remember it so clearly, when I was sitting alone after watching that video. The classroom had emptied out, the lights dimmed, and I just sat there, thinking. It wasn't some magical transformation, but it was a moment of complete honesty. I admitted to myself that I had been running, not from people, not from school, but from responsibility. The responsibility of mastering myself. It's much easier to blame the world than to look in the mirror. But mirrors don't lie, and in that mirror I saw potential. I saw weakness too, but I also saw the strength to do something about it. Since that day, I've understood that the real work in life is internal. Success, peace, happiness, none of these can last if the foundation inside is shaky. You can build a perfect life on the outside, but if you haven't dealt with your mind, that life will feel hollow. That's why this principle is so foundational. Before we conquer anything else, we must conquer ourselves. And that's not a one-time effort. It's a daily practice. It's choosing awareness over autopilot. It's choosing courage over comfort. It's choosing truth over convenience. So as I carried this lesson beyond the classroom, it changed how I approached everything. I stopped trying to control things I couldn't. I started focusing on what I could control. My thoughts, my actions, my reactions. And slowly I began to feel free. Not because life got easier, but because I stopped being a prisoner to my own mind. That's the kind of freedom no one can give you and no one can take away. It's the freedom that begins the moment you realize the hardest battle is within, and the greatest victory is mastering it. The next realization I carried with me was one that completely reshaped how I viewed struggle. Pain is not the enemy. It is a guide. We live in a world that teaches us to avoid pain at all costs. From a young age, we're conditioned to equate pain with failure, discomfort with danger, and suffering with something that must be fixed or escaped. But what if the very thing we keep running from holds the answers we've been seeking? That idea challenged me deeply. I had always believed that the path to success, to happiness, was supposed to feel smooth. If something felt hard, I assumed I must be doing something wrong. But the more I reflected, the more I realized how backwards that belief was. Every meaningful moment in my life, every breakthrough, every growth spurt, every transformation, had been born from discomfort, not despite it, but because of it. There is a kind of pain that breaks us down, yes, but there is also a kind of pain that wakes us up. The kind that forces us to pay attention, the kind that whispers, there's something here you need to see, and the problem isn't that pain exists. It's that we refuse to listen to it. We try to numb it, drown it out, or push it away rather than asking, what are you trying to show me? Pain, I began to see, is not punishment. It is feedback. It's a signal that something inside us is shifting, evolving, or demanding our attention. Whether it's physical pain, emotional pain, or the ache of uncertainty, it all carries wisdom if we're willing to slow down and receive it. But most of us don't. We distract ourselves with noise, with busyness, with temporary pleasures, just so we don't have to sit with that uncomfortable silence. And yet, that silence is where the real answers live. I remember one particular moment during school when I felt overwhelmed by pressure, academic stress, family expectations, my own fear of failure. I kept trying to suppress it, act like I was fine, but inside I was crumbling. And then, during one quiet evening, it hit me. Maybe I wasn't supposed to fix this feeling. Maybe I was supposed to feel it fully and let it teach me something. So I sat down, I breathed. I stopped resisting the pain and let it wash over me. What I discovered surprised me. Beneath the surface anxiety was a simple truth. I was afraid of being seen as weak. I was afraid that if I failed, I wouldn't be enough. That realization didn't erase the pain, but it gave it shape. It gave me something to work with. Instead of blindly fighting the emotion, I could begin to understand it, to heal from it, and to grow beyond it. That process taught me something no book or lecture ever could. Pain is a messenger. You can ignore it and let it grow louder, or you can honor it and let it transform you. This is the paradox. Most people want to grow, but they don't want to struggle. They want to be strong without having to lift the weight. They want clarity without going through confusion. But that's not how transformation works. Growth requires resistance. Just like a muscle grows through tension, our character grows through challenge. And the deeper the struggle, the deeper the roots of strength that can form if we allow it. And so I started to shift my mindset. When things got difficult, I stopped asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and started asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" That small shift made a massive difference. Suddenly, life wasn't happening to me. It was happening for me. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, the moments of failure, of disappointment, of heartbreak, those became my teachers. I realized that pain builds patience, it deepens empathy, it humbles the ego, it reveals blind spots, it sharpens vision. And perhaps most importantly, it proves to us that we can endure far more than we ever imagined. That knowledge, journey through pain, is the foundation of confidence. Not the kind of confidence that says, "I'll never fall," but the kind that says, "Even if I fall, I know how to rise." Over time, I began to see pain as an ally, not a threat. It became a compass that pointed me toward areas of my life that needed attention and healing. It pushed me beyond comfort and into a version of myself I never would have discovered otherwise. And the more I leaned into it with awareness, the less power it had over me. It didn't disappear, but it no longer defined me. Pain, when faced with courage, becomes wisdom, and wisdom becomes power. That is the cycle. That is the gift hidden in every difficult moment. And once you see that, you no longer fear the pain, you respect it, because you know that on the other side of that fire there is something precious, a version of yourself that's stronger, clearer, and more alive than ever before. Another deep truth that unfolded within me was the understanding that discipline is not restriction. It is liberation. For much of my early life, I associated discipline with rules, limits, and sacrifice. It seemed like a burden, something heavy and rigid. It was what you were forced to have, not what you chose. The disciplined people were the ones who said no to fun, who followed routines like machines, who seemed to live in cold structures while the rest of us lived in color. At least that's what I thought, until I learned what true discipline actually meant. Discipline, I came to realize, is not about suppression, it's about alignment. It is the ability to act according to what you truly value, even when the mood or the moment tries to pull you off track. It's about living by intention, not by impulse. And in a world full of distractions, temptations, and noise, this kind of intentional living is a form of freedom. Freedom is not doing whatever you feel like in the moment. That kind of freedom often leads to chaos, inconsistency, and regret. True freedom is having the strength to choose what serves your future rather than what simply satisfies your now. That's what discipline gave me. It gave me choices where I used to feel stuck. It gave me focus when the world tried to scatter my attention, and it gave me pride in myself, not the pride that boasts, but the quiet pride that says, "I kept my promise to myself." I remember how hard it was to build. In the beginning, discipline felt like swimming upstream. I wanted to stay up late, skip responsibilities, delay effort. I wanted results without the grind, but slowly I began to see that discipline wasn't a punishment, it was a pathway. Every time I woke up early when I didn't want to, every time I trained my body or mind through repetition, every time I chose consistency over comfort, I was casting a vote for the person I wanted to become. It's not glamorous, it's often invisible, No one claps for you when you show up on time, when you keep your commitments, when you choose to sit with your thoughts instead of running from them. But over time, these small, quiet acts begin to shape your life in powerful ways. They become the architecture of your character. They become the backbone of your strength. Discipline is not just about routines. It's about self-respect. It's about treating your time, your energy, and your potential as sacred. When you commit to something and follow through, not because it's easy, but because it's right, you build trust with yourself, and that trust becomes your confidence. It becomes the fire you carry when things get dark. It becomes the force that keeps you going when motivation runs dry. I started to realize that discipline was not about denying myself joy. It was about choosing a deeper joy over shallow distractions. It was about choosing long-term fulfillment over short-term pleasure. Every time I chose discipline, I was telling my future self, I care about you, and that to me is one of the most powerful acts of love. It's easy to get caught up in the illusion that freedom means no rules, no structure, no limits. But I learned the hard way that a life without direction doesn't lead to happiness. It leads to anxiety. It leads to wasted time, missed opportunities, and a quiet ache of dissatisfaction. Structure doesn't confine you. It supports you. Just like a tree needs roots to grow tall, we need discipline to rise into our potential. There were days when I failed, days when I broke the schedule, ignored the alarm, gave in to excuses, but I learned not to let failure become my identity. Discipline taught me that slipping is not the same as quitting. That falling off the path is not the end, unless you refuse to get back up. And every time I returned to my path, no matter how imperfectly, I came back stronger. Eventually, discipline became something I no longer resisted. It became something I relied on. It was the tool that helped me carve out peace in a chaotic world. It was the anchor that kept me steady when everything around me was in flux. It didn't make life easier, but it made me stronger, and that strength became the quiet confidence that I could handle whatever came next. So when I look back now, I don't see discipline as something I had to endure. I see it as something that saved me. It saved me from drifting, from giving in to the lesser version of myself, from losing years to aimlessness. It gave me clarity, it gave me direction, and most of all, it gave me the ability to live a life that I respect, because I know I earned it. There came a point in my journey when I began to see clearly that clarity is not something you stumble upon. It is something you create. I used to believe that one day things would simply make sense, that if I waited long enough, lived long enough, clarity would arrive like sunlight through a window, sudden, complete, and comforting. But the more I lived, the more I realized that clarity isn't something that just shows up. It must be carved out layer by layer through self-exploration, reflection, and most of all, silence. The problem is that the world we live in is loud. It's loud with opinions, demands, distractions, and noise. So much noise that it drowns out our own voice. And when you can't hear yourself, how can you possibly know where you're meant to go? I began to understand that many people are not truly lost. They're just surrounded by so much external input that they've forgotten how to listen inward. They confuse motion with meaning, busyness with purpose. But running fast in the wrong direction doesn't take you anywhere worth going. There's a reason people feel anxious, overwhelmed, uncertain. It's not just the challenges of life. It's the disconnection from their own inner compass. We've been taught how to memorize, how to compete, how to keep up. But we've rarely been taught how to sit still, how to turn inward, how to ask the deeper questions. Who am I, really? What do I want to become? What is meaningful to me, not to others, not to the world, but to me? And until those questions are answered, nothing external will satisfy. It might distract for a moment, but it will never fulfill. That's when I realized clarity is not given, it is earned. It's earned in the quiet moments, in the spaces between all the doing. I had to learn to sit with my thoughts, even when they were uncomfortable. Especially when they were uncomfortable. I had to stop looking for quick answers and start embracing the long, honest process of self-inquiry. It's not glamorous, it's not easy, but it is necessary, because once you start to peel back the layers of noise, you begin to hear something real, your voice, your truth, your direction. There were nights when I sat alone, eyes closed, breath steady, mind racing. And I didn't fight the thoughts. I watched them, I learned from them, I started noticing the patterns. The fear that showed up as overthinking, the self. Doubt disguised as logic, the comparisons that quietly chipped away at my self-worth. It was only in stillness that I could see those patterns clearly, and once I saw them, I could begin to break them. Clarity isn't a lightning bolt. It's a slow sunrise. It's the kind of light that appears gradually, almost imperceptibly, until suddenly you're no longer in the dark. But to reach that light, you must be willing to walk through the fog. You must be willing to ask the questions most people avoid, because those questions hold your answers. Not the answers that fit in neat boxes, but the answers that resonate deeply, the ones that give shape to your path. As I began creating clarity within myself, I noticed how much lighter life began to feel. Not because all my problems disappeared, but because I stopped carrying confusion as a permanent weight. I no longer needed to have every step mapped out. I just needed to know the direction, and that direction came from alignment, from understanding my values, my principles, and my purpose, not the one assigned to me, but the one I claimed. And here's what's often misunderstood. Clarity is not certainty. You can have clarity and still feel unsure at times. You can know your direction without knowing all the details. Clarity is not about having all the answers. It's about having the courage to live the questions. To trust your steps, even when the road ahead is dim, and to keep walking anyway. I stopped chasing clarity in books, in approval, in accomplishments. Instead, I started creating it in the way I lived. In the discipline I practiced, in the silence I honored, in the decisions I made from alignment, not from fear. And the more I chose that path, the more life began to respond. Not always with ease, but always with truth. Because clarity is not a destination, it's a way of being, a relationship with yourself that deepens over time, a commitment to stay awake in a world that numbs. And once you've tasted real clarity, even for a moment, you will never again settle for confusion masquerading as comfort. You will know what it feels like to move from your core, and that knowing is priceless. What began to change everything for me was the realization that your environment is always shaping you, even when you think it's not. We often like to believe that we are immune to influence, that our willpower is strong enough to rise above any atmosphere. But the truth is, no matter how disciplined, determined, or focused you are still being affected by what surrounds you. And if you're not consciously shaping your environment, then your environment is unconsciously shaping you. It took me a while to understand just how much the spaces I moved through, the people I spent time with, and even the energy I allowed around me were impacting the way I thought, the way I felt, and the way I behaved. It's easy to underestimate the subtle power of daily surroundings because they don't scream for attention. They whisper quietly, repeatedly, until one day, without realizing it, you've adopted habits that weren't really yours. You've accepted standards that are far lower than what you deserve. You've begun to mirror the limitations of those around you instead of reflecting your own potential. This wasn't about blaming others. It was about waking up to the reality that I had allowed myself to drift. I had surrounded myself with people who were comfortable being stuck, who spoke more about what couldn't be done than what was possible. And over time their fear began to rub off on me, not in big ways but in small moments. Hesitations second, guessing settling. I started shrinking to fit the spaces I was in, instead of expanding to match what I was capable of. That awakening was hard, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. You begin to notice how every word, every conversation, every bit of clutter, every scroll, every sound, it's all shaping your internal world. And if you're not intentional, you end up living reactively instead of purposefully. So I started to clean up my space, not just physically, but energetically. I began creating an environment that reflected the kind of person I wanted to become, not the kind of comfort I wanted to maintain. I became more selective about who I gave my time and energy to. I stopped seeking approval from people who didn't value growth. I stopped watering connections that drained me, and I started to build a circle, even if small, that spoke life into my goals, not fear. Your environment isn't just your room or your schedule. It's your emotional climate. It's the tone of your conversations. It's the energy of your home. It's the kind of content you feed your mind. If you are always surrounded by doubt, distraction, and drama, you will eventually become anxious, scattered, and reactive. But if you place yourself in spaces that promote clarity, purpose, and self-respect, you begin to transform without forcing it. It's not always easy. Sometimes creating the right environment means walking away from familiar people. Sometimes it means being alone for a while before the right community finds you. But I learned that being alone and aligned is always better than being surrounded and suffocated. And in that solitude, I began to grow faster than I ever did in crowded rooms. I also began to reframe how I saw my space. I turned my room into a reflection of my inner calm. I kept it clean, quiet, and intentional. I minimized the digital clutter that once filled my day. I replaced noise with silence, chaos with ritual, distraction with direction. And slowly, my inner world started to reflect the same qualities: calm, focused, resilient. It taught me that we often try to fix our minds while ignoring the environment that is constantly triggering them. You cannot heal in the same environment that is hurting you. You cannot focus in an environment that is feeding distraction. And you cannot grow in an environment where your wings are clipped by the fear of others. The truth is, you rise or fall to the level of the space you stay in. That includes the conversations you entertain, the energy you tolerate, and the habits you allow to repeat. So I ask myself daily, is this environment helping me remember who I am, or is it making me forget? From that place, everything began to shift. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow, quiet, consistent, but it was real. And that's the power of your environment. It works on you silently, day after day. And if you let it, it will build you into something strong, something clear, something powerful. But only if you choose it consciously. Because the moment you stop shaping your environment, it starts shaping you. There was one more truth that came to me quietly, not in the loud moments of achievement or breakthrough, but in the stillness between them. It was this: growth does not always feel like success. Sometimes it feels like loss. This was a difficult truth to accept, because like many people, I was conditioned to associate progress with smiles, with praise, with tangible wins. But real growth, the kind that changes you at your core, is often messy, uncertain, and invisible to others. There were moments when I was shedding habits, identities, relationships, even dreams I once clung to. Yet it didn't feel like victory. It felt like grief, and that's what nobody really tells you about transformation. To step into who you're becoming, you must be willing to let go of who you've been, and letting go, even when it's necessary, still hurts. Because the old version of you was familiar. It may not have been your best self, but it was safe, known, predictable. Walking away from that into the unknown isn't a smooth, shining path. It's often a quiet breaking, a soft morning, a lonely reorientation. I began to see that growth is not about collecting more. Sometimes it's about carrying less fear, less attachment, less performance. It's about releasing what no longer serves your path, even if it once did. Even if it once felt right. Growth requires the humility to say, what brought me here won't take me further, and that's not a betrayal of your past, it's a commitment to your future. I had to leave behind versions of myself that were built for survival, not for wholeness. I had to confront the parts of me that used achievement to avoid self-worth, that used productivity to avoid silence, that used control to avoid vulnerability. And that unlearning process was brutal. There were days when I didn't feel like I was growing. I felt like I was unraveling. But what I eventually understood was this: the unraveling was not the end. It was the beginning of something more honest, more grounded, more aligned. Nobody claps for you when you're in that kind of growth. There are no medals for quietly healing, no applause for choosing peace over performance, no celebrations when you finally forgive yourself, or when you stop explaining your worth, or when you decide to stop chasing approval. But those are the moments that shape you. They're the foundations on which your true life is built. And the more I leaned into that process, the more I saw how essential discomfort is. Growth rarely happens in comfort. Comfort sustains the status quo, but if you want to rise, if you want to evolve, you have to be willing to stretch, to be misunderstood, to feel lost, confused, raw. That tension isn't a sign that something's wrong. It's a sign that something real is shifting inside you. I stopped measuring growth by how good things looked on the outside and started measuring it by how honest I felt on the inside. Was I aligned with my truth even if it was hard? Was I making decisions from love and clarity, not from fear and habit? Was I willing to keep going even when no one noticed, even when it wasn't easy to explain? That became my compass, not external validation, but internal alignment, and with that came a different kind of strength. A quiet, steady strength, one that didn't need to prove anything, one that didn't fear starting over, one that knew how to sit with discomfort instead of running from it. Because the longer I stayed with discomfort, the more it became a teacher, not a punishment, a mirror, not a wall, and in that mirror I started to see who I really was, not who the world told me to be. Growth is lonely sometimes. You outgrow rooms, you outgrow conversations, you outgrow versions of yourself you once fought to protect. But that loneliness is not emptiness, it's space, space for something more aligned. Space for what's next, space for your real self to breathe. I learned not to rush that process, not to chase the next win just to escape the waiting, because the waiting holds wisdom too. Sometimes the pause between chapters is where you rebuild your strength, your clarity, your direction. And when the next step comes, it won't come from pressure, it will come from power. This is what growth became for me, not an upward climb but an inward deepening, not a highlight reel but a raw, unfinished story. And in that story I found myself, not the version that had it all together, but the version that had nothing to hide. The one who knew that every scar was a lesson, every delay a preparation, every loss a refinement. So if growth feels painful, confusing, or invisible, keep going. It means you're doing it right, not performing it, not posing in it, living it. And that's the only kind of growth that will ever truly change your life. And now, as I look back on what I watched while I was still in school, I realize it planted something in me, something quiet but unshakable. It didn't hand me answers, but it gave me the questions that would shape my life. It whispered truths I wasn't ready to hear then but never forgot. And as I grew, as I stumbled and stood again, I returned to those truths. They became a compass when life felt unclear. What I saw in that moment wasn't just a teaching, it was a seed. And over time, through silence, struggle, and honesty, that seed became growth. The kind you can't fake, the kind you can't rush, the kind that changes you from the inside out. So if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. What we take in during our quietest seasons often becomes the foundation for our strongest selves. Never underestimate what speaks to your spirit, even if it's quiet, even if it's early, even if you don't fully understand it yet. One day it might just wake you up to who you really are.